Eden's 23 minutes, Lake Cook to the Junction. Kennedy, an hour, O'Hare to downtown. 39 minutes from Montrose, 27 on the Express. Eisenhower, 58 minutes, 390 to downtown, 40 from Manheim. Stevenson, an hour and 7 minutes, 355 to Drive. The Ride, 42 minutes from 95th. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
More of Chicago's Morning Answer comes your way next. Now your official Chicago land weather forecast from your 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center. 36 degrees right now, cloudy with a high near 39 degrees today. Chance of showers tonight, cloudy with temps dropping into the mid-30s. Possible rain tomorrow with a high near 41. Currently 35 degrees at O'Hare, 36 at Midway, and 36 along Chicago's lakefront. Your next news update is at 9 o'clock. Continuous coverage of news, traffic, and weather is at 560theanswer.com. Now more of Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Make sure to check out the Income Store live video stream of today's show right now at 560theanswer.com.
Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Jeff Van Drew, he's Democrat from New Jersey, one of the two Democrats to vote against the impeachment inquiry resolution the other week. And he was on with Maria Bartiromo yesterday saying, frankly, his position hasn't changed. And this is getting us nowhere, this Star Chamber proceeding presided over by Adam Schiff.
I just think we'll keep going down this road, keep spending more time. Many of us came to Congress because we really wanted to accomplish goals, really work on issues such as health care, work on issues dealing with prescription drugs, election security, the debt, the deficit. The list goes on, and I could speak on and on about all the things that we need to do. And I just don't think we're hearing anything new. And real quickly, we must understand the importance and the level of what impeachment is. Hundreds of years of history, no one has ever been convicted of impeachment. And that's the point. We're going to have an election next year. Yeah. Let's have the election. Let's fight through the election. Let's do what Republicans and Democrats and whomever else does. But this is going to get us nowhere. We've spent millions of dollars, in my opinion, tons of money, tons of time, tons of hurt, fraction the nation apart. I haven't seen this to be a good thing.
I mean, does anybody even realize that on Wednesday there's a Democratic presidential debate? Because I haven't heard from any of those guys. I forgot Bernie Sanders is okay from his heart attack. I mean, really, you talk about sucking the oxygen out of a party. They're just wasting time.
Well, they're wasting time.
It's a distraction.
Well, it is a distraction, but I think this is why they're rushing to tie it up before, certainly before Christmas. And there's also a bit of additional competition in terms of the timeline. And John Ratcliffe, also on with Maria Bartiromo this weekend, explained what that is. The IG report, the DOJ IG report, not to mention the U.S. Attorney Durham's report, criminal investigation.
The report is supposedly 500 pages. It doesn't take an inspector general 500 pages to say that everything was done correctly and properly. And I can't tell you everything that's in there, but what I can tell you is that I know that the inspector general is going to have to find that there were things that were done wrong, that there was exculpatory information that wasn't provided to the FISA court. And I think it's going to be an indictment of Adam Schiff, who has written his own FISA rebuttal memo, if you remember back in January of 2018, saying, how dare Republicans criticize people like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and Andy McCabe and Bruce Orr, who have done nothing wrong. I think that the IG report's going to find that there were problems in the FISA application process, and they don't want that to come out until after they've impeached the president.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because that would potentially go to undermine Adam Schiff's credibility as the Grand Inquisitor in this proceeding. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Ed Morrissey, senior editor for hotair.com. He was in town a couple weeks back for our Freedom Summit, and I think Amy will agree, even more dashing in person than he is on the radio.
Exactly.
Yeah, Ed, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. Really nice introduction, and it was so great to meet you and to meet the listeners of The Answer at the Freedom Summit. What a great event that was. Thank you so much for including me in it.
Yeah, we're glad to have you included. So what about, let's start here with the sort of competitive timelines that John Ratcliffe was speaking about, the Inspector General's report that's due in early December, and Pelosi and House Democrats' interest in moving this toward articles of impeachment as soon as possible, thus 8 witnesses this week.
Well, I think Pelosi's working off of a different timeline, right? Because they want to get impeachment done before Christmas, because they want to go into, they don't want to have the House still tied up with impeachment when you start getting into Iowa and New Hampshire and the rest of the primary states. And I think what they're hoping for is that the Senate will dispense with it rather quickly so that everybody can just get back to business as usual at the end of this. The coming reports from Durham and from Horowitz, I think, are basically a different sort of issue for them. It doesn't. I think this is the reason why they decided to focus on Ukraine-gate for impeachment, because it doesn't have anything to do with Durham or a Horowitz report, which would have undermined anything that they were doing on Russia collusion or obstruction. The obstruction charges that came out of the Mueller report. Well, actually, they didn't come out of the Mueller report. The Democrats sort of manufactured them out of the Mueller report. And so I think that this is two different kind of timelines, and they're trying their best to step around Durham and Horowitz by focusing on Ukraine-gate.
Now, this week, as Dan mentioned, there's another week of big witnesses, including Gordon Sondland, who I actually want to hear from. But explain his relationship with President Trump. Is it true that he did donate $1 million to his campaign?
Well, I think he was a bundler, right? I think he was a bundler. I think he contributed to the inauguration, and he was generating. And it's not unusual for bundlers to become ambassadors. In fact, it's one of the more reliable paths to that sort of appointment. Normally, it wouldn't make him necessarily the EU ambassador, which is more of a strategic ambassadorship. But Sondland was a big supporter of Donald Trump, and like a lot of big supporters of presidents, and ended up as an ambassador. So that's not really terribly unusual. I think I'm more interested in hearing from Sondland to find out exactly where he wants to step. I mean, does he just say there was nothing to this? All of this was just speculation as to Donald Trump's motives. He never told me about a quid pro quo. Or does he kind of throw shade on Rudy Giuliani and say, hey, look, it wasn't me pushing this thing. Rudy Giuliani was kind of a loose cannon, and he was shooting his mouth off over there, and he left everybody with the wrong impression. Or does he have to, he's gone back and had to address his previous testimony a couple of times, apparently. Is this going to be something where he's going to be tripped up on this and ends up being forced to say something he doesn't want to say?
You know, it's interesting. Part of this, when you're talking about people that are supposed to be nonpartisan and non-ideological, I mean, that's the handle we're supposed to confer on Kent and Taylor and Yovanovitch. Right. The policy under President Obama, $16 million in aid for basic items like blanket and clothing, along with this, and I love this because this is perfectly Obama-esque, along with counseling for traumatized civilians and to help those who fled the fighting. That's the way we're going to buttress our Ukraine against Russian aggression. That was the Obama policy. And that was not popular among all of these people testifying. And the Trump policy, of course, the Javelin missiles and actually helping Ukrainians fight off Russian aggression rather than dealing with their trauma as they get routed by the Russians. The policy now is the policy they wanted. And so this 55-day holdup, even if you take it from the worst possible perspective vis-a-vis the president's motives, they got the policy that they wanted, and yet we're supposed to believe their horrors at the process. These are bureaucrats in a difficult part of the world who understand the give and take of geopolitics. We're supposed to understand that these nonpartisan operatives are just so personally offended, and it has nothing to do with politics, that they've come forward to corroborate in part at least the perspective, the disposition of the so-called whistleblower, if not the specifics of it.
Well, I think you put it very well, Dan. Is that these are not nonpartisan in terms of ideological outlook. These are bureaucrats who worked within the State Department, which tends to be a more progressive institution anyway, and probably are not very big fans of Donald Trump, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But Donald Trump was elected by the people to run the foreign policy of the United States. Bill Taylor and George Kent were not. They're there to facilitate whatever the policy is that's established by the President of the United States in terms of diplomacy. And the problem with, I think, that they're going to have with the House impeachment inquiry is that they don't have any direct evidence of a quid pro quo. They don't even really have a whole lot of indirect evidence of a quid pro quo because of what you just said, because the aid ended up flowing and the investigations never happened. And in order to buy this, you'd have to buy that there was no other logical explanation for a 55-day hold in the wake of an immediate wake of an election where we didn't have any idea who the newly elected president was or what he was going to do. Remember, this guy was a Canadian before he got elected president. Yeah. Nobody knew what he was going to do. And nobody really knew for certain what policies he was going to put in place. And I would say that before handing over lethal military aid to somebody who is a complete cipher, you might want to wait a couple of months just to make sure that everything's going to be on the up and up. And I think that there was one witness who even mentioned this, and it may not have been in the public inquiry. I think it was one of the depositions. And it may have been Tim Morrison who's going to be testifying this week about that. But the issue more was that, or at least I think much more reasonably you can say, look, Zelensky was a comedian before he got elected. We had no idea what he was going to do. We wanted to wait for a few weeks to see what was going on in Ukraine before we released several $100 million worth of Javelin systems that could start a war.
And what did President Obama, what kind of aid did he provide to Ukraine besides blankets and pillows?
No, I think that's it, right? I mean, it was all humanitarian aid. None of it was military aid. They were asking for military aid, and Obama was still working on the nuclear arms treaty with Putin. It never happened, and he didn't want to infuriate Russia so much that he couldn't negotiate I think they're referring to them basically as the New START talks. And those never went anywhere. But that was the reason why Obama was playing it very carefully in Ukraine.
As it pertains to 2020 POTUS politics, let's talk about something other than Ukraine. Mayor Pete, desperate for black support in South Carolina, he's bumped up in Iowa and he's moving a little bit in New Hampshire, but he's still got a problem appealing to African-American Democrat primary voters. And I don't know if this is going to help inventing them. It's reported that Mayor Pete put out a list of 400 black South Carolinians that endorse him and his quote-unquote Frederick Douglass plan. And the reporting is 42% of the people on the list are white. They're not all Mayor Pete supporters. And on his plan, they use stock photos from Kenya. So I don't know if Mayor Pete's putting his best foot forward in South Carolina.
No, I mean, this is the type of thing that is sort of emblematic of less than competent campaigns. I mean, before you release that type of stuff, you're supposed to vet it because for sure your competitors are going to vet it. And I suspect what happened was that somebody on one of the competing campaigns, probably Biden's campaign, took a look at the list and just started doing a Google search on some of these names and on some of the aspects of Mayor Pete's plan. This is the type of thing that can backfire pretty badly. I don't know how much that backfire that's going to hurt Mayor Pete because, as you noted, he doesn't have a whole lot of support from African Americans in this campaign, and it's questionable as to whether or not a mayor from South Bend, Indiana, is really going to be significant enough to attract that type of strong demographic support. This is a demographic that really wants to be at the table when it comes to governance, and I don't know that Mayor Pete's track record shows that. So they're much more likely to stick with Biden or to transfer their flag to somebody like Kamala Harris or Cory Booker rather than to Mayor Pete.
And your interpretation of the gubernatorial results in Louisiana on Saturday?
I think that's a problem. I think that this is a bigger problem than Republicans might want to admit. John Bel Edwards was a pretty popular guy. He was a Democrat is a very, very moderate Democrat, right? He's a pro-life Democrat. He's a pro-gun Democrat. So this is the kind of guy actually maybe Democrats should have been looking for in 2020. But still, Louisiana is a deep red state, and in Kentucky you could say, well, Matt Bevin was just really unpopular, which was true. I mean, I think Donald Trump pulled Matt Bevin far closer to the finish line than Matt Bevin was going to get there by himself. But in this case, I think that Donald Trump campaigning there was a really big risk, and I think it does sort of leave the impression that he may not be moving the needle as much as his supporters would like, even in deeply red states like Louisiana. And that may be a problem for next year.
He is Ed Morrissey, senior editor for hotair.com. Ed, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook.